Hey everybody, this is Josh Runquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and it's time to talk about my top 10 albums of 2014. First, I would just like to say if this is the very first video you're checking out in this series, you've checked it out since my first one of 1988, or you're going to be keeping track all the way till 2022. With only a few episodes left in the series, I thank you very much for checking any of these out, and I really hope you find some new discoveries, if nothing else, between all 340 albums I've been talking about. Let's begin. Coming in at number 10 for its first appearance in this series, and trust me, won't be the last, is Panopticon with Roads to the North. And this album is basically a thin-layered metaphor for main songwriter Austin from his journey from Kentucky to Minnesota, where he currently crafts beer. It used to be very close to me, now it's closer to the border of Canada, but still, I think that's a pretty cool thing. But this is also the album where a lot of people started paying attention, although the previous album, Kentucky, is where people really started paying attention to what this band was all about, because of the instrumentation of essentially bluegrass and black metal combined. It is a very odd thing to think about, but it worked so very well. In every subsequent album, there's been little nuances that change things up quite a bit. Sometimes instead of just bluegrass, it's more Americana and folk. Sometimes it's a bit more post-rock. Sometimes it's straight up country. And sometimes it's a great conglomeration of all of it. This one starts to incorporate a little bit more of the post-rock elements. It's a little more Americana as well, instead of just bluegrass and, playing on the banjo. There's a lot of great stuff that's going on here. It really does feel like a North American folk metal album. And this is the album I'd probably suggest people potentially start with. I mean, I should do a tier video on Panopticon, and I probably will. But I don't think there's really a wrong choice here, but if you're checking out everything for the first time, and this is the first you're hearing of this band, why not start with the album On the Road to Minnesota? I mean, Roads to the North. Coming up next, at number 9, is Within Temptation with Hydra. My favorite Within Temptation album, even if it is a basic answer. This is the last symphonic album from Within Temptation unless they go back to their roots, but they seem pretty happy right now with their modern metal tinges that they've been doing, and that's not a bad thing. They've been writing some really super catchy stuff lately. But that's not to say that this album isn't super catchy in its own right. Also featuring some really cool guest appearances from Howard Jones, Tarja, and, believe it or not, Exhibit. Yes, Pit My Ride's own Exhibit is featured on a song on this album, but it's not just an album of guest appearances. There's a lot of great songs throughout this entire album that really does feel like a great bridge between their really great symphonic roots into more of the modern tinges. You can start to see it on this album, and I think it's a great bridge with a lot of great songs on this album. And if you've been wanting to get into Within Temptation, I think this might be the best album to be able to start with. It may not necessarily be your favorite, even if it is mine, but I think you'll find something to really enjoy about it. Coming in at number 8 is Skullfist with Chasing the Dream. And this is by far my favorite Skullfist album. Everything about this album is just a great throwback to the 80s and early 90s, but still sounding modern enough in 2014 to really capture everything that they were going for. It's that great revival sound, it's heavy metal, speed metal, a little bit of thrash going on, almost power metal moments going on, but it's just a ragtag team of Canadians just wanting to be able to create some great heavy metal. And that's all that really needs to be said about it. Whether they do some mid-tempo stompers, whether they do some great speed metal riffs, it's got everything that you could possibly want from this style. And if you're not familiar with Skullfist and you are interested in this style, you need to check this out immediately. Up next at number 7 is Ancient Wisdom with Sacrificial. And this album is potentially the heaviest album the band has ever done. They really turn up the intensity when it comes to actually using electric amps, an electric guitar, bass, drums, everything. If you saw previously in the series that I talk about their debut album, A Godlike Inferno, where it is Alice in Chains' Jar of Flies, but about Satan. On this album, still very much about Satan and satanic culting and the Church of Satan, all Satan goodness, but it's electrified. It has more of that doom sludge feel behind it, still kind of has that Alice in Chains grungy, angsty moments going on between it, but it's all done in their own specific way. Oddly enough, I saw these guys opening for Solstifer, of all bands, who have a little bit of Satan love themselves, and that was a very incredible show. And they did a lot of songs off this album, and they actually did electrified versions of their acoustic songs as well too, so hearing songs like The Opposition electrified was a much different experience than I was expecting. But I also gotta say, this is the last Ancient Wisdom album I actually enjoyed. Not to say that the next two albums didn't have their charms as well, it's just I didn't have the attachment to them, as I only found out about them after the fact, and I wasn't able to really appreciate them the way that I had like anticipation for this particular album. But that said, if you're looking for the electrified version of what Ancient Wisdom is all about, this is the album to check out. Coming in at number 6 is Nightingale with Citadel, the sophomore album and best album from the band, where if you look at Portal of I, and I know the band was really hurt for some reason to all the comparisons to Opeth, they tried to dismantle those thoughts with Citadel. They really became their own band with this album, and it is their magnum opus. Sorry, opus. Yes, this album, not only containing some of the longest songs the band has ever done, or at least movements that they've ever done, it just, everything that you loved about Portal of I is pushed to new extremes on this album. It gets faster, it gets longer, it gets more epic, it's more progressive, it's more blackened, it's more death metal, it's just more of everything. And it's just incredible to see everything that they were able to accomplish on this album. They got to probably their best heights on this album, and honestly, it just never really came back the same way even now. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still able to do world touring and stuff like that, at least now in 2023 after the pandemic, but are they at that level that they were for Citadel? Well, time will tell. Also, this is probably the last time you're gonna see Nightingale on this list, unfortunately, and there's reasons for that. But I will say with Citadel, it's still one of my favorite albums of the 2010s, and it really is just that good. Coming in at number 5 is The Contortionist with Language. And this album is a game changer for me. Like, I loved what this band was doing before, but it had a little too much deathcore for my liking. Although you can't deny the song Flourish, which is one of the greatest songs of the 2010s. But some major changes started happening in The Contortionist, mainly the incorporation of vocalist Michael Lassard of Last Chance the Reason, and the overall shift in sound from away from that deathcore sound into more of the prog sense, and it was the best thing that they could have done. At least on this album, they still kept some of the heavy death metal, deathcore sound going on, but it was only used as a spice. It wasn't used as the main course. The main course was that progressive metal, progressive rock sound, and it leads to such a great ebb and flow, no pun intended if you check out the album, way of listening to the album where it feels uplifting, it feels soothing, and even when it does get into the heaviest moments on this album, it feels encouraging, it feels like a dreamlike state, and I really don't think there's a better way to be able to describe it than that. It's a great language, a great musical language, if you will, also no pun intended. The Contortionists just nailed it with their best album here with Language, and they've only released one more album since this, and they did perform this album live last year, and I really hope that they will get back and record a new album, because I really want to see what post-pandemic The Contortionist is all about. Coming up at number 4 is Sinister with Animals, and this is such a grandiose piece of music that I love so very much. It is a great combination of progressive rock and indie rock, which it really does have a lot of indie rock influences the band always has, which can be my thing, it can also not be my thing. But this album also has a lot of great prog elements to it, whether the band likes to admit it or not. I know they're not the biggest fan of that connotation of being a progressive band, but they're a progressive band. I mean, they start off with their best song that they ever wrote, Best of You. It is an 8-minute epic masterpiece, while the rest of the album has more of that indie flair to it. Best of You is that prog rock masterwork. that any prog fan needs to check out, and it's also a great message that I need in my own life. It has some lyrics that really hit home with me, and I'm probably going to go listen to it after I'm done recording this because in the midst of this, I am in a deep depression wave, and I could really use some of that positive thinking that that particular song has. This album rules, and they've only put out one more album since then, which is quite the shame. I haven't had the chance to hear it yet because at least at the last time that I checked, it wasn't available for streaming, and I didn't get a promo for it, and it was only available locally to their British Columbia, so that might have changed since then, but that's how it was for me. But anyways, this album is widely available, and it is their best work. And if this sounds intriguing to you, please go check it out. Coming in at number 3 is Anathema with Distant Satellites. And this album is really an album of two halves. One half being a little bit longer than the second half, but allow me to explain. That first half is that emotional progressive rock that the band became known for on their previous two albums, We're Here Because We're Here, and the magnum opus, Weather Systems. On this particular album, they wanted to make a change, and a change they did make, which kinda gravitated towards their last album, The Optimist, although that went to a different direction that wasn't really my bag. What was done here definitely was, because it was also very emotional, even if it did focus more on electronics. It's a bit more electronica. The title track even goes into like a rave, like a dance rave part at the end, but it still feels so emotional and fits so perfectly for what the beginning of the song actually had. And while it does incorporate more of that electronica sound, I don't think they lost any of the emotion behind it. And if you're looking for that emotional progressive rock, again, that's in the first half of the album, all the way up to the title track of the band, Anathema. Then it goes into a different course if that's not your bag. But hey, I love both sides of this. It is one of the best Anathema albums, and you should check it out if you dug what you've heard from Anathema before, if you've checked out anything I've talked about on this list. Coming up at number 2 is Nightingale with Retribution. As of right now, the latest album from Nightingale, which is now 9 years ago, and I really hope that changes because I need some new Nightingale in my life. And if you remember earlier in this series, you'll know that I've talked about Nightingale before, and they were much more of a goth rock band. Like, they were inspired more by the Sisters of Mercy than they were by, like, Yes and Rush. But by the time of Retribution, they really became more of a progressive metal, progressive rock band, really inspired by 70s and 80s prog. Much different than the gothic rock overtones that they used to be. I love both sides of the band, and I love the fact that they were able to take, in a now prog direction, add those gothic overtones, and just create something magical. Again, I really hope this isn't the last Nightingale album. I need some new Nightingale, and I could always use some new Dan Swano music. Of course, I know how busy he is with mixing and mastering, and I know that's what pays the bills for him, but I hope at some point that he will create some new music under the Nightingale umbrage, because I love it so much, and any prog fan who has never checked out Nightingale is doing themselves a disservice by at least not checking out Retribution. And finally at number 1, my favorite album of 2014 is Trypticon's Milana Kosmata, and this is a heart-wrencher of an album that really takes a look at the mental psyche of dealing with mental health struggles. It really makes you feel like you're in your own personal hell, much like the previous debut album from Trypticon. Yes, it is a continuation of that, but it is also done in a much different way. Songs are faster on this album when they get faster, they're doomier when they get doomier. It just hits everything into even better song structures, better performances from everyone involved, and sadly, as of right now, it is the latest studio album from Trypticon and Tom G. Warrior. I know they're doing a lot of stuff right now where they're celebrating Celtic Frost and Hellhammer, and I really hope that there will be a new Trypticon album at some point, because these two albums are simply not enough. I crave more. As someone that's suicidally depressed, I need more of that suicidally depressed music in my life. It is such a great cathartic feeling to be trapped in all of this darkness and know that I'm not the only one feeling this way, yet still continuing to go on. I actually got to talk to Tom G. Warrior at Maryland Death Fest for this album, And that was one of the coolest moments of my entire life, getting to talk to him about this. And I got to open up and show my appreciation for him. I loved everything about it. And if you need something that is that cathartic purge of mental health struggles, or you just love doom metal and gothic metal and black metal, near death metal, almost thrash metal moments at times, this is the top album of 2014 in my humblest of opinions for a good reason. You should check it out yourself. And there you go, folks, my top 10 albums of 2014. What do you think? Did you like the list? Did you not like the list? Did you make some new discoveries here? Do you just want to hate me for my own personal opinion of what affected me in 2014? Let me all know down below. And of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, everything you can to be able to spread the word of Heavy Debriefings. It would be much appreciated. And until the top 10 albums of 2015 or another top 10 list that I do, my next interview, review, or any other video that I do here on the Heavy Debriefings YouTube channel. For Heavy Debriefings, Josh Runquist saying, see ya.